I want to be honest with you about something before this account even begins. I've been filing cross-species behavioral reports for 11 years. 11 years of watching alien students react to human food, human sleep cycles, human aggression response patterns, human humor that nobody else understands, and human stubbornness that honestly baffles even me sometimes. And I say that as someone who deeply respects the species. I have seen Thalaran students cry, and I mean genuinely weep, full body trembling, when they watched a human eat a raw chili pepper and smile about it. I have seen a Drexian cadet, 6 feet 4 inches of armored exoskeleton and military conditioning, back slowly out of a room when a human student demonstrated what humans call a trust fall. I have submitted reports about humans sleeping through emergencies, laughing at their own pain, and deliberately choosing activities that increase their chance of physical harm because, and I quote, "It's more fun that way." So I thought I had seen enough to be prepared. I was wrong. The morning of the incident, and I am going to call it an incident because that is what it is on paper, even though the students who were present will tell you it was something closer to a revelation, started like any other morning at Velthari University's Interspecies Integration Campus. The campus is enormous. I should describe it because setting matters here. Velthari's integration campus was built specifically to accommodate 17 different species simultaneously, which means the architecture alone is something most beings have never encountered. There are corridors with 5 different gravity settings running parallel to each other. There are food halls where the ambient temperature varies by 30 degrees between one end of the room and the other, because some species eat better in cold, and some species literally cannot function if the air around them drops below a certain threshold. There are study lounges with walls made of translucent alloy that shift color based on ambient sound levels, which was originally installed for the benefit of Cerevian students who communicate partly through color perception, but which everyone else has come to love for its own aesthetic reasons. The sky over the integration campus, and yes, the campus has its own sky, domed under a climate-controlled atmospheric envelope, was the particular shade of pale violet that the environmental systems produce in the early morning hours. There is something specific about that color that always makes the campus feel quiet, even when it isn't. Students were moving between buildings. The transit pods were running their usual routes. Someone in the east courtyard was playing an instrument that sounded like glass harmonics, which carries strangely in the integrated atmosphere and makes everything feel slightly dreamlike. It was, in every measurable way, an ordinary morning. Marcus Akefer was not supposed to have a wound. That is the thing that makes this particular morning unusual, because nobody knew he did. Not the dormitory monitors, not the medical check-in station he passed on the way to the science wing, not even the 2 students who walked with him from the residential block to the anatomy lab. His biosignature scan at the building entrance registered him as within normal human physiological parameters, which, and I will come back to this point later at considerable length, turned out to say something very interesting about the difference between human normal and what every other species considers normal. He walked into Laboratory 7 at approximately 08:43 Campus Standard Time, set his equipment case on the workstation he'd been assigned for the semester, pulled off his outer jacket, and that is when everything changed. Section 1, the morning before. Marcus Akefer had been at Velthari University for 4 months by the time any of this happened. I want to be fair to him and tell you what he was actually like before we get to the incident, because I think it matters. It matters because the incident only makes sense if you understand who Marcus was in the weeks leading up to it, and because the other students' reactions only make sense if you understand how they already felt about him. He had arrived at the beginning of the fall integration cycle, one of 6 humans selected for the Galactic Academic Exchange Authority's inaugural cross-species university enrollment program. Velthari had accepted 3 of them. Marcus was one. The other 2, a woman named Delcy Marchetti from somewhere in northern Italy on Earth, and a young man named Yusuf Adami from Lagos, had been placed in different faculty buildings and different dormitory blocks, so Marcus's daily experience of being human at Velthari was a largely solo exercise. He did not seem to mind this. That was the first thing students noticed about him. Not his height, which was average for a human male and therefore shorter than most of the species enrolled at Velthari's integration campus. Not his voice, which was unremarkable. Not his diet, though his willingness to eat cafeteria food that most species found chemically questionable was a topic of ongoing low-level fascination. What students noticed first, consistently, was how unbothered he was. There is a specific quality that humans have, and I've tried to articulate this in previous reports, that reads, to many galactic species, as either supreme confidence or alarming ignorance. The quality is this: humans seem genuinely unaware that they should be intimidated by things that are, objectively, intimidating. A Drexian student entering an unfamiliar social environment will calibrate constantly, adjusting posture, vocal register, territorial proximity. A Cerevian student in a new group will modulate their color output to signal submission before establishing hierarchy. A Keth student will remain almost entirely still until they have assessed threat levels across 14 behavioral dimensions. Marcus Akaffer walked into the integration campus orientation session 4 months ago, looked around at 14 species he had never personally encountered before, and said, out loud to nobody in particular, "This is going to be so cool." And he meant it. That was the thing. He genuinely meant it. Larith, a Thaloran student whose translator module renders their name in Galactic Standard as something approximating that sound, told me later that they had spent the first 3 weeks of the semester trying to determine whether Marcus's casualness was a dominance display. In our culture, Larith told me, a being who shows no caution is either at the top of the hierarchy or is an offering to whatever is at the top of the hierarchy. We could not determine which. By week 4, most students had settled on the conclusion that Marcus was simply, genuinely, relaxed. He was good at science, that helped. The exchange program had selected students partly on academic merit, and Marcus had a particular gift for xenobiology and materials chemistry that made him a useful lab partner regardless of whatever species dynamics were at play. He asked questions without self-consciousness. He admitted when he didn't know something. He had a habit of tapping his pen against his knee when he was thinking, which the Cerevian students found mildly hypnotic, and the Keth students found mildly threatening, but which everyone had more or less adapted to. He was also, in that particular way that humans sometimes are, physically comfortable in a way that many galactic species are not. This is worth noting because it comes back around. What I mean is this: Marcus moved through the world the way humans move, like the world is mostly fine and their body is mostly fine, and whatever small physical discomforts arise are just sort of part of the texture of existence. He would crack his knuckles and not notice the way Cerevian students froze when they heard it. He would occasionally press his fingers into a sore muscle on his shoulder, work it briefly, and then keep doing whatever he was doing, completely unbothered by the fact that he had just self-applied pressure to what, in multiple other species, would be a clearly communicable distress signal. He once ate something extremely hot from the cafeteria, blinked rapidly 3 times, breathed out carefully, and then kept eating. The Keth student seated beside him that afternoon filed an informal observation report, asking whether humans routinely chose to harm themselves at mealtimes. The wound that started all of this, happened 2 days before the anatomy lab incident. Marcus mentioned it to nobody. Section 2, how he got the wound and why he didn't tell anyone. The maintenance section of Velthari's integration campus contains, among other things, several corridors of older infrastructure that haven't been fully upgraded to the current safety standards. The university is in the middle of a long-term renovation cycle, which means that certain wings are in various states of being improved, and certain pieces of equipment that were never designed with 17 different species in mind are still in use while their replacements are being manufactured. Marcus was not supposed to be in the maintenance section. This is worth clarifying because it is relevant to why nobody knew about the wound. He had not gone there to cause trouble or even to explore. He had gone because Instructor Velso Keth, one of the xenobiology faculty members, a Keth with a fondness for unorthodox teaching methods, had asked several students to retrieve equipment samples from Storage Unit 14C as part of a practical exercise. Marcus had volunteered, as Marcus tended to do when there was something practical that needed doing. Storage Unit 14C contained, among other things, an older model of alloy processing equipment that had a partially degraded edge seal. The equipment was supposed to be inert. It was, by Keth engineering standards, inert. By human standards, by the standards of a human male in his mid-20s who is focused on retrieving a specific equipment sample and not paying full attention to the spatial relationship between his forearm and a partially degraded alloy edge. It was not entirely inert. The edge caught him on the inside of his left forearm. He said, and I have this from 3 different student accounts who were in the maintenance corridor at the time, the following. Now, just that. 1 syllable. And then he looked at his arm, made a small sound that one witness described as a brief exhale through the nose, picked up the equipment sample, and kept walking. The cut was not small. Instructor Velso Keth, who examined the scene afterward, estimated based on the alloy edge's profile that the laceration was approximately 9 centimeters in length and at least moderately deep. This is not a minor injury by any species standards. This is not the kind of thing that most galactic species would walk away from without some kind of distress response. Marcus walked away from it. He returned to the main campus building, delivered the equipment sample to the appropriate location, went to his dormitory, apparently cleaned and dressed the wound himself using what humans call a first aid kit, a portable personal medical kit that human exchange students are required to carry. Because human physiology is sufficiently different from campus standard that the university's automated medical stations sometimes struggle to calibrate appropriate responses. And then went to sleep. He had a class the next morning. He attended it. He did not mention the injury. The class went normally. He ate dinner in the main cafeteria. He completed an assignment. He went to bed again. The following morning was the anatomy lab. He walked to the lab with Lureth, an Adrexian student, named something that translates approximately as Kev Saul, because the integration program pairs students for transit where possible. The 3 of them had been paired for morning transit for about 6 weeks by this point, and had developed what Marcus would probably describe as a friendship, and what Lureth would describe as a productive interspecies proximity arrangement with positive behavioral overlap. They talked about the assignment for that morning's lab. Marcus seemed fine. He was always fine. He had his equipment case. He had his coffee, the human beverage that most campus species had been warned not to attempt and had therefore developed an almost ritualistic fascination with. He was, as far as anyone could tell, completely, unremarkably fine. And then he took off his jacket. The anatomy lab at Velthari's integration campus is not what you would picture if someone said, anatomy lab, to you and you were thinking of an Earth facility. It is, first of all, enormous. The ceilings are close to 6 meters high because several enrolled species require that clearance for comfortable operation, and the lighting systems are adjustable across a frequency range that accommodates 7 different primary visual spectra. The workstations are modular. They reconfigure based on a morning enrollment scan that identifies which species will be present and adjusts table height, tool accessibility, atmosphere density at the work surface, and about 40 other variables that most students don't think about because the system handles it automatically. That morning, Laboratory 7 had 14 students enrolled. I will tell you who was there, because it matters for understanding the range of reactions. There were 3 Thaloran students, Lureth, whom I have already mentioned, and 2 others, Sereth and Veloman. Thalorans are tall, slender, and covered in a fine sensory membrane that responds to environmental stimuli the way human skin responds to temperature changes, except more dramatically and more visibly. They are deeply empathic by species standard, not telepathically, but physiologically. They feel others' pain, not metaphorically. Literally, when a Thaloran is in close proximity to another being experiencing physical distress, they experience a sympathetic physiological response. This is relevant. There were 2 Drexian students, Kevsal and another named Ashtor. Drexians are, to human eyes, imposing, heavy builds, natural exoskeletal reinforcement on the shoulders and upper back, a facial structure that reads as permanently stern to humans but is actually neutral in Drexian terms. They are former warrior caste species, fully integrated into galactic society, but the physiological residue of that ancestry is still present. They have a very acute threat detection response and a strong instinct to respond to injury signals in their proximity. There were 4 Cerevian students, whose names don't translate cleanly into any text-based system, and who I will refer to as Save 1 through Save 4. Cerevians are the species with the color-modulated communication I mentioned earlier. Their skin, for want of a better word, shifts through a spectrum of colors that carry social and emotional meaning. Calm is a pale silver blue. Discomfort is amber. Fear is a deep red-orange that Cerevians call the alarm register, and that is, in their culture, one of the most significant signals a being can display. There were 2 Keth students. The Keth, as a species, are the most visually unremarkable of the enrolled groups, roughly humanoid in proportion, gray-green in coloring with large eyes designed for low-light conditions. They are also, as a species, the most analytically oriented and the least instinctively emotional. Keth process distress through data and tend to respond to unexpected stimuli by going extremely, eerily still while they calculate a response. This, too, is relevant. There were 2 Merle students, a species so new to galactic integration that I won't spend much time on their physiology, beyond noting that they are small, rapid-moving, and communicate in part through high-frequency sound bursts that other species register as a faint ringing sensation just at the edge of perception. And then there was Marcus. 15 students total, 14 species representatives, 1 human. Instructor Fivel, myself, in this account, was at the front of the lab preparing the morning's demonstration materials. The lab session was scheduled to cover adaptive regeneration in silicon-based organisms, which was part of the xenobiology curriculum, and which Marcus had specifically mentioned being excited about when I'd previewed the syllabus earlier that week. The students arrived in the transit-paired clusters that the program had established. Lureth and Kevsal walked in with Marcus at 08:43. The others filtered in over the next 4 minutes. There was the usual settling noise, equipment being unpacked, translator modules being adjusted, the low harmonic hum of the workstation reconfiguration system completing its morning calibrations. Marcus set his equipment case on his workstation. He said something to Lureth. I was across the room and couldn't hear it, but Lureth later told me it was something about the morning's reading material, something Marcus had found funny about the way the regeneration process was described. He was smiling. He picked up his coffee container. He set it down. And then he pulled off his outer jacket and dropped it on the back of his chair. The dressing on his arm was not immediately visible. The wound had been on the inside of his left forearm, and the bandaging wrap he had applied was partially concealed by the cuff of his inner shirt. But he pushed the sleeve up slightly. Again, this was just a habitual movement. the kind of thing humans do when they're settling in at a workstation, and the edge of the dressing became visible. It was Lurith who saw it first. Lurith went very still. Thalorans, when they experience a sudden sympathetic response, do not go still the way Keth goes still, careful and calculating. They go still the way something goes still when it has been surprised into not knowing what to do with its own body. All that natural expressiveness, all that flowing physiological responsiveness just stops, like someone hit pause. Lurith said, "Marcus." Just the name, nothing else. Marcus, who was opening his equipment case, looked up. "Yeah. Your arm." Marcus looked at his arm, then he looked back at Lurith. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, caught it on something in the maintenance block a couple days ago. No big deal." What happened in the 30 seconds after that sentence is, to the best of my ability to document it, as follows. Lurith's sympathetic response hit. I could see it from across the room. The fine sensory membrane visible on their neck and forearms rippled in a pattern that every Thaloran experienced observer knows as acute distress response. They didn't make a sound. They just reached out, one hand, palm up, the gesture their species makes when they are asking permission to assess an injury, and said, very quietly, "How deep?" It was not quite a question. It was the kind of sentence that happens when someone already suspects the answer is worse than they want it to be. "It's fine," Marcus said. This, I would like to note, is a sentence that caused approximately half the students in the room to look up. Kev Saul, the Drexian, had been unpacking equipment on the adjacent workstation. He was not looking at Marcus when Lurith said Marcus's name. He was looking at Marcus now. Drexian threat assessment processing, once triggered, is extraordinarily fast. The species had spent several thousand years requiring rapid threat classification, and the neurological infrastructure for that classification doesn't disappear just because the threat landscape has changed. Kev Saul looked at Marcus's arm, looked at the bandaging wrap, and did something that I have never seen a Drexian student do in 11 years of observation. He set down what he was holding very carefully and turned to face Marcus directly, which in Drexian body language signals that you have classified the situation as requiring full attention. "That is a wound dressing," Kev Saul said. His translator was running at its standard formal register, which meant his voice carried that particular measured cadence that always made him sound like he was making an official statement. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I bandaged it. Went. Day before yesterday." The Cerevian students, all 4 of them, had gone amber. Not all at once and not identically, because individual Cerevians modulate through the same color ranges at different rates depending on their personal emotional processing speed. But within approximately 15 seconds of Lurith's first reaction, all 4 Cerevian students in the lab had shifted from their resting silver blue into varying shades of uncomfortable amber. The one sitting closest to Marcus, save 2, who had been assigned the workstation directly to his right, had gone a shade deeper, closer to the warning register, and was leaning very slightly away from Marcus with the involuntary movement pattern that Cerevians display when they encounter something that triggers their ambient distress sensors. The 2 Keth students had gone still. This sounds simple, but it is worth describing more precisely. Keth stillness during data processing is not like human stillness. Humans go still when they're thinking by reducing external movement. Keth goes still the way a system goes still when everything is being redirected to a single calculation. There is a sense of absence that is almost physical, like the air around them has been evacuated. Both Keth students had their full sensory attention on Marcus's forearm, and they were not moving at all, and the effect was eerie enough that Save 3, who was seated near one of them, shifted slightly without seeming to realize they were doing it. Marcus, for his part, was looking around at his classmates with the expression he often wore when he was aware that he had caused a reaction he didn't fully understand, mild, interested, the slightly tilted head that meant he was trying to figure out what the issue was. "Is it?" he started. "May I see it?" Larith said, still not quite a question. Marcus looked at Larith for a second. Then he shrugged, the particularly human gesture that means approximately, "I don't particularly care, but proceed," and held out his arm. Larith reached out and very gently, with what looked like almost practiced medical care, peeled back the edge of the bandaging wrap to examine what was underneath. What was underneath was a 9-centimeter laceration that was, 2 days after the injury, showing the characteristic human wound healing progression, which, as I would later learn in the post-incident discussion, is the part that made everything worse. The wound had begun to close. It was clearly healing. By any objective measure, the healing was proceeding at a rate consistent with healthy human tissue regeneration, which is actually impressive by many galactic standards. But it did not look fine. It looked, and I'm going to use this word because it's the honest word, it looked awful. Not because it was infected. It wasn't infected. Not because it was catastrophically severe. It wasn't catastrophically severe. It looked the way human wounds look when they are healing, but are still, undeniably, open, because human wound closure happens over days, and involves the body's clotting and tissue rebuilding process working in stages that are visible on the surface, and the intermediate stages involve discoloration and partial closure, and a generally alarming appearance to any species that does not routinely see human healing from the inside. Larith looked at the wound for 3 seconds. Then Larith said, "Marcus, this is not healed." "I know," Marcus said, "it's healing." "There's a difference. What I want to convey here, and this is something that the subsequent debrief report spent considerable time on, is that Marcus was not being dismissive. He was not performing toughness. He was not trying to impress anyone. He was, to the best of my observation and his own later account, simply accurately describing his experience of the situation. He genuinely did not think it was a big deal. And this gap between what he genuinely thought and what everyone else in the room was seeing, is the thing that made the next 15 minutes so extraordinary. Kevsal came around his workstation. This is notable because Drexians don't cross another person's workstation boundary during lab time without specific cause. It's a territorial space protocol that the integration guidelines address explicitly. Kevsal crossed it anyway and looked at Marcus's arm over Larith's shoulder. "You have," Kevsal said slowly, "been in class." "Yeah," Marcus said. "For 2 days." "Yeah." "With this wound." Marcus made that exhale sound again, the one the maintenance corridor witnesses had described. "It's not, it's a cut. It's not like I needed to stop living my life." Kevsal said something in Drexian that his translator rendered as, "A wound of this depth in a Drexian would require," and then the translator paused, apparently calculating a time equivalent, and then said, 72 standard hours in medical care. Minimum. Marcus looked genuinely surprised by this, not embarrassed or defensive, surprised, like this was interesting information. 72 hours in medical, just for a cut. Not just for, Kevsal stopped, restarted. This is not what you call a cut. It kind of is though, Marcus said. I should have intervened here. As the lab instructor, stepping in was probably my job. I want to be honest about why I didn't. I was watching what was happening with the quiet, focused attention of someone who had been filing cross-species behavioral reports for 11 years, and who recognized that something genuinely rare was occurring in this room. I was watching Marcus with the careful attention. I was watching the students with equal care. And I was observing, with what I can only describe as a kind of professional amazement, the moment when 14 students from 7 species all arrived simultaneously at a single shared question. What is this human? Save2 had moved closer despite having moved away 30 seconds earlier. The approach was involuntary. I could tell because Save 2 wasn't looking at the wound directly, which would be purposeful movement. They were drifting toward it in the directionless, pulled way that happens when your body is responding to something your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. Sarith, the second Thaloran student, had stood up from their workstation completely. "It hurts," Sarith said. It was a statement, not a question. Thalorans can sense pain in others physically, as I've explained, and Sarith was clearly receiving signal. Marcus turned to Sarith. "Yeah," he said, "a little." "It's not bad." "It is not bad." Sarith said this the way you say something when you are repeating it back to confirm you have understood correctly and are still processing whether that understanding is accurate. "It hurts, and it is not bad." "I mean, pain is kind of relative, right?" This sentence, "pain is kind of relative," produced the following documented reactions. Sarith sat back down. Both Keth students turned to each other and exchanged a look. Keth communication is largely subsonic and therefore invisible to most other species, but the exchange was visible as a brief, synchronized shift in their posture that every Keth-experienced observer knows as a full agreement signal. They were agreeing about something. What they were agreeing about, I would learn later in the debrief, was that Marcus had just said something that contradicted 6 centuries of Keth pain biology research. 3 of the 4 Cerevian students had gone from amber to a color I can only describe as alarmed amber, a slightly more orange-red tint that in Cerevian social settings means I am increasingly concerned and I am making this known. Save 2, who was closest, had a distinct red-orange tinge at the edge of their color range. Kevsal, who had served as the primary communicator for the Drexian students throughout this exchange, looked at Marcus for a long moment. "You self-treated," Kevsal said. "Yeah." "Alone?" "Yeah." "Without going to the medical station?" "I've got a kit," Marcus said. "I cleaned it, wrapped it, it's fine." Kevsal said, again in Drexian, something his translator rendered as alone. Just the one word, but the way he said it, and I have been around enough Drexians to read the register, it was not a repetition for confirmation. It was the word said the way you say something when you are encountering a concept that doesn't fit into any category you have available. Loreth was still looking at the wound. They had not replaced the edge of the bandaging. They seemed to be examining the healing tissue with an expression that in Thaloran body language signals something between awe and distress, a combination that Thaloran faces are actually capable of expressing simultaneously in a way that no other face is. "It is closing," Loreth said, "from the inside. On its own." "Yeah, that's how skin works," Marcus said. "Not like this," Loreth said softly. "Not just on its own, unassisted." "Well, the bandaging is assisting." "The bandaging is covering it." "Covering it is assisting." Loreth looked up from the wound and looked at Marcus's face. I have known Loreth for 4 months, and I know their expressions. What was on their face in that moment was something I can only describe as wondering. "Does it hurt right now?" Loreth asked. "At this moment?" Marcus thought about it. He actually thought about it. He looked slightly upward and to the left in the way humans do when they are genuinely consulting an internal state rather than reaching for a social script. "Sort of," he said. "It's more like it's present, like it's there. I'm aware of it, but it's not like I'm thinking about it." There was a silence. Save 3, who had not spoken yet, said in their synthesized translator voice, "You are aware of the pain, but you are not focused on it." "Yeah, pretty much. And this is common for humans." "I mean, yeah, unless it's really serious. You kind of just push it back, keep going." Save 3 looked at Save 1. Save 1 looked at Save 3. The color that passed between them in that moment, a brief shared pulse of deep, complex amber orange, was something I later asked Save 3 to explain, and they said, "We were telling each other that we had understood something new, that this was not a performance, that this was simply how he is. It was Ashtor, the second Drexian student, who had been quiet until this point, who asked the question that took everything to a different level. Why did you not go to the medical station? Marcus looked at Ashtor. I figured I could handle it. You figured? I mean, I know basic first aid. It's not like this was beyond what I know how to handle. Clean it, apply pressure, wrap it, keep an eye on it. Basic stuff. Ashtor absorbed this. In Drexian military training, they said carefully, we are taught that a wound of this depth requires medical supervision because of the risk of, they paused while their translator searched for the right term, infection, complications, secondary damage. I mean, those are all possibilities, Marcus said, in the tone of someone who is agreeing to a theoretical point. But it's been 2 days and I've checked it every day and it's fine. So, you check it? Yeah. Every day. Yeah, I'm not reckless, it's fine. One of the Keth students, I'll call them Keth 1, said something then that no one had expected. Keth students in group discussions tend to wait until the conversational pattern has established itself before entering it, because they prefer to speak from a position of full data comprehension. Keth 1 had been still and quiet since the initial alarm, processing, and now they spoke. We ran your biosignature scan this morning, Keth 1 said, at the building entrance. I know, Marcus said. Everyone does. Your scan registered within normal human physiological parameters. Yeah. Normal. Keth 1 said this with the very particular Keth inflection that means they are about to make a point. For a human, your normal includes what you are describing. Marcus nodded, pretty much. A wound of this extent in the process of closing unassisted, with pain present but not debilitating, with full functional activity maintained. This is your normal. Yeah. Keth 1 went still again. But this time it was a different kind of still, not the calculating absence of before, but the particular Keth stillness that I've seen when a Keth student encounters a fact that causes them to revise something they previously believed was fixed. Keth 2 said quietly, humans are built for this. Not a question, an observation. Marcus looked at them. I mean, yeah, kind of. We evolved in a pretty rough environment. Our bodies are kind of designed to keep going. Your bodies are designed, Keth 2 said, working through it carefully, to sustain damage and continue functioning. Well, designed is a strong word. It's more like it happened. We come from a planet that was trying pretty hard to kill us, so we got adaptable. The silence that followed that sentence was long enough that I started thinking I should say something. Start the class, redirect, do something. But then Veloman, the third Thaloran student who had been sitting quietly at the back of the room, said something that changed the quality of the whole room. Did it scare you? Everyone looked at Veloman, even Marcus. When you were injured, Veloman said, in the maintenance block, did it scare you? And Marcus, this is the part I find myself returning to. This is the moment that every single one of the 14 students who filed a post-incident account mentioned. Marcus did that thing he does when he's genuinely thinking, looked slightly upward and to the left and said, for like a second, when I first felt it. There was this, yeah, a second of, oh, that's bad. And then I looked at it and I thought, okay, I can handle this, and then it was fine. A second, Veloman said. Maybe 2, I don't know, it wasn't long. And then you decided that you could handle it, and the fear went away. Pretty much, yeah. Veloman's sensory membrane, visible at their neck and jaw, rippled in the pattern that in Thaloran body language means something like profound processing. Not distress, not alarm, something quieter and more complex. We cannot do that, Veloman said. When we experience fear, when we sense pain in ourselves or others, it does not go away because we decide it will. It stays. Until it resolves. Marcus looked at Velo Man for a moment with something on his face that I can only describe as gentle. That sounds harder, he said. This is where the account expands, because what happened next involved people who were not in Laboratory 7. Velthari University, as part of its integration campus security protocols, maintains a rotating presence of Galactic Treaty Authority personnel. These are not military soldiers in the traditional sense. They are peacekeeping officers, drawn from multiple species, whose function is to maintain the safety of a campus environment that houses 17 species and a large number of very experimental social arrangements. They do campus rounds at standard intervals. They monitor the entry biosignature scans. They are, in campus parlance, the peace officers, and most students barely notice them. The officer who came to Laboratory 7 that morning was a Drexian named Velcom. I knew Velcom slightly. They had been on the campus rotation for about 8 months, long enough to have developed opinions about the integration program in general and the human exchange students in particular. Velcom's opinions about the human exchange students were, prior to that morning, best described as measured skepticism. They had made comments, professional, appropriate, nothing outside the lines, about the practicality of integrating a species as physiologically variable as humans into a galactic academic environment. They thought humans were unpredictable. Not dangerously so. Velcom was too experienced an officer to be alarmist, but in the way that things are unpredictable when you don't have enough data to accurately model their behavior. Velcom had been informed by the building monitoring system that Laboratory 7 had an unusual concentration of elevated biosignatures. All the non-human students' alarm systems were quietly pinging. The Cerevian color shift was visible from the corridor through the lab's translucent walls, and a room full of amber-toned Cerevians is, by campus protocol, worth checking on. Velcom came in, assessed the room in the way that Drexian officers assess rooms, which is quickly and completely, identified Marcus as the likely focus of the room's attention, looked at Marcus's exposed forearm and said, "What happened?" Not a question, a Drexian authority voice, the kind of voice that expects an answer. Marcus, who at this point had been having a quiet, earnest conversation with a room full of people who were trying very hard to understand him, looked up at Velcom with the mild surprise of someone who has been interrupted. "Old injury," Marcus said. 2 days ago it's healing." "You need to report to the medical station," Velcom said. "I cleaned it and wrapped it myself. I've been monitoring it. It's healing normally." Velcom's eyes, the Drexian equivalent, the wide, amber-lensed sensory organs that give the species their particular expression, moved from Marcus's arm to Marcus's face, and then back to the arm. "That wound is 2 days old," Velcom said. "Yeah. And you've been attending class, doing the reading, eating dinner, sleeping, normal stuff." Marcus's tone was not confrontational. It was the tone of someone very patiently listing true things. "I'm not in distress. I don't need the medical station." Velcom looked around the room, at the amber Cerevians, at Lareth, whose sympathetic membrane was still showing the fine ripple of distress, at Kevsal, who was standing a full step closer to Marcus than their workstation required, at the 2 Keth students, who had given up any pretense of working and were watching this exchange with complete analytical attention. "Your classmates disagree," Velcom said. "My classmates are being—" Marcus stopped, looked around the room, something shifted on his face. "Really kind," he finished, and his voice had changed register slightly, gone quieter. "I know it looks bad. I know it probably looks bad to everyone here, but I promise you I've been in worse shape than this and kept going. This is manageable." "Worse shape," Velcom repeated. "Yeah." A pause. "How much worse?" Velcom said, and there was something different in their voice now, not the authority register. Something more like the tone, a person uses when they have asked a question and are not entirely sure they want the answer. Marcus thought about it. I got hit by a car when I was 19, he said. That was worse. I broke my collarbone in a sports injury in university. That was worse. I had food poisoning really bad once. That was, he paused, different kind of worse, but worse. This is a cut on my arm. It's not even close to the top 10. The room was very quiet. Velcom looked at Marcus for a long moment. Then they looked at Lureth. Then they looked at Kevsal. A car, Velcom said. You were struck by a transport vehicle. Yeah. And you recovered. Yeah. Took a few weeks. And this, Velcom gestured at the arm, is not even comparable. Not really, no. Velcom, who had been standing with the fully upright posture that Drexian officers hold in authority situations, did something that I have genuinely never seen a Drexian peace officer do in an active response situation. They relaxed their posture, just slightly. The shoulders came down. The stance widened a few centimeters. It was the body language of someone who has reclassified a situation. You have a working first aid kit, Velcom said. Yeah. And you know how to use it. Yeah. And you will report to the medical station if there are any signs of infection, increased swelling, spreading redness, fever, anything that changes the pattern, Marcus said. Yeah. I know the signs. I'll go if any of that happens. Velcom looked at Marcus for one more moment. Then they looked around the room at the 14 students who were watching this conversation with the full, undivided attention of beings who were learning something new about the universe. Resume your class, Velcom said, and then to Marcus almost quietly, report to the medical station anyway, after class, so they have it on record. Yeah, okay, Marcus said, that's fair. Velcom left. The door closed. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. And then Save 4, who had not spoken once during the entire exchange, said, he negotiated with the peace officer. I mean, I wasn't, Marcus started. You gave reasons, Save 4 said, and the officer accepted them. And modified the requirement. Instead of report now, it became report after class. Because of your reasons. Yeah, I mean, that's how you talk to people, right? Save 4's color had shifted into a new register, not alarm, not distress, but something I would describe as impressed amber, a shade that carries a specific social meaning in Cerevian culture, and that translated when Save 4 later explained it as, I have updated my model of this being. The class did eventually happen. I want to be clear about that. We did cover adaptive regeneration in silicon-based organisms. Marcus was, as I had expected, genuinely engaged with the material and asked 2 of the better questions of the session. But what happened in the 5 minutes between Velcom leaving and me formally beginning the lesson is something I want to document carefully, because it is, in my professional judgment, the most significant part of this account. With the peace officer gone and the formal social pressure of that exchange resolved, something relaxed in the room. Not completely. The Cerevian students were still running warm in their color register, and both Keth students were clearly still processing, but the sharp edge of alarm softened. And the questions came. Not the pointed, alarmed, what is happening questions of the previous 20 minutes. Different questions, quieter ones. The questions that come when people are genuinely trying to understand something and have moved past their initial reaction into actual curiosity. Lureth, who had finally gently replaced the edge of the bandaging wrap and stepped back from Marcus's workstation, said, when it heals, fully, will there be a mark? Probably a scar, Marcus said. Yeah, probably. He looked like he was thinking about something. I've got a few. They're kind of, he made a small gesture that didn't translate, they're just there, part of the map. The map, Lureth said. You know, your body's like a map of what you've been through. The scars are like, they're the record of things that happened, things you survived. The room absorbed this. Kevsal, who had returned to his own workstation but was still facing Marcus, said, "Drexians remove scars when possible. Medical correction. A visible wound record indicates a failure of defense." Marcus looked at Kevsal, not with judgment, just that genuine interest. "Really? Some people do that, sure. But a lot of people keep them, like some people are proud of them. They're stories." "Stories?" Kevsal said. "Yeah, like this one." Marcus rolled up his sleeve a little further and indicated a mark on his upper forearm, slightly different in texture from the surrounding skin. "This is from when I was 8 and tried to climb a fence that had a broken wire at the top. And this one, a different spot, fainter, that's from cooking. Hot oil. I was 16 and thought I knew what I was doing in the kitchen." He said this the way you say something that is embarrassing but funny in retrospect, with a small private smile. Not performance, just memory. Sareth had come a step closer, not alarmed, now drawn. "The wound when you were 8, Sareth said. "Did you cry?" "Probably, yeah," Marcus said. "I was 8. And now it's just there, and I don't think about it except when someone asks." "Does it hurt still?" "No, scars don't usually hurt unless you press on them wrong. This one doesn't." "So the body," Sareth said, working through something, "heals the pain as well as the wound." "Yeah, that's kind of the point, right? You get hurt, it hurts, the healing happens, and then it just stops hurting. Eventually." Sareth's sensory membrane, still showing the fine distress ripple of sympathetic response, quieted slightly as they processed this. "I watched it happen in real time. The physical empathy that Thalorans experience doesn't go away because they understand something intellectually, but it does modulate." Sareth's expression shifted from the wondering distress of before to something more like wondering understanding. Still emotional, just pointed in a different direction. Velo Man from the back of the room said, "You said your planet was trying to kill you." "Yeah," Marcus said. "And it didn't." "Not yet," Marcus said, with the tiny smile that humans deploy when they are making a dark joke in a gentle way. Nobody laughed except Marcus. But several people in the room made expressions that were their species' equivalent of recognizing something unexpectedly funny. And Save2 made a color flicker that later turned out to translate as, "This being is strange, and I mean that in a way I don't have a word for." "Do you think," Veloman said, "that this is why humans are difficult to stop? In the historical accounts, in the records of the conflicts before the Galactic Treaty, humans are described as—" Veloman searched for the right word, persistent. Marcus considered this. "Maybe. I don't know if it's the planet specifically. I think it's more like we've got a pretty strong survival drive, and we've got this thing where we can look at something terrible and figure out how to keep going anyway. I don't know if that's strength. Sometimes it's stubbornness. Sometimes it's just not having a better option. But you keep going." "Yeah," Marcus said, "pretty much we keep going." Marcus went to the Velthari medical station after class, as Velcom had requested. He went alone, which was what he had intended. He arrived at the medical station with Larith, Kevsal, Sareth, Kethwan, and Save2. None of them had formally planned this. What happened, as best I could reconstruct from the individual accounts, was that as the class ended and Marcus gathered his equipment and said, "I'll see you guys at the transit point for evening session," Larith had said, very simply, "We'll come." Marcus had looked at Larith. "You don't need to." "We'll come," Larith had repeated. And that had been the end of it. The medical station at Velthari's integration campus is staffed primarily by Keth medical practitioners, because Keth medicine is the most thoroughly cross-species compatible in the current galactic medical framework. The head of the station that afternoon was a practitioner named Selvet, who had been doing cross-species medical care for longer than most students had been alive. Selvet was not particularly surprised by Marcus's wound. They were, As a Keth medical professional with extensive human exposure training, more calibrated to human physiological realities than most beings Marcus had encountered, they examined the wound with practiced efficiency. They confirmed it was healing correctly. They cleaned it again. Marcus made the small ow sound once, without drama, and Larith's membrane rippled at the precise moment Marcus made the sound, which caused Marcus to look at Larith with an expression of genuine concern that I find both funny and quietly touching in retrospect. "Are you okay?" Marcus asked Larith. Larith, who was experiencing a sympathetic pain response, said, "I should be asking you that." "I'm fine," Marcus said. "I know you are," Larith said. "That's what I'm still adjusting to." Selvet, working around this exchange with the patience of an experienced cross-species practitioner, finished the cleaning and applied a proper medical dressing and told Marcus that the wound was healing at a rate consistent with excellent human tissue regeneration and that he should return in 4 days for a follow-up. 4 days, Marcus said. "Sure." "The tissue is strong," Selvet said. They were looking at the wound with the particular attention of a medical professional who has seen a lot but is seeing something they find genuinely notable. "Your self-treatment was adequate. The inflammation response is clean. Whatever evolutionary process your species underwent, it has produced very effective wound response chemistry." "Thanks," Marcus said. He seemed genuinely pleased by this, the way you are when a professional tells you that something you did casually was actually correct. "I wasn't sure I'd done the wrapping right." "You did it correctly," Selvet said. Then, after a pause, "Where did you learn human first aid?" "We take it in school. Most people know the basics." Selvet absorbed this. Most humans know basic wound care. "Yeah, it's pretty standard." Selvet looked at the 5 students who had accompanied Marcus, then back at Marcus. "Your classmates seem to find this surprising." "Yeah," Marcus said, with the slightly rueful look of someone who has spent a morning being the unexpected center of attention. "Apparently." Section 10. What each person said afterward. The post-incident debrief process at Velthari generates formal student accounts for any incident that triggers the building monitoring system's concern protocols. All 14 students in Laboratory 7 that morning submitted accounts. I've summarized them here because each account contains something that I think belongs in this record. Larith's account said, in part, "I have been seated next to a human for 4 months, and I have watched him move through this campus as though it is his natural environment. He carries coffee in a container designed for an entirely different species grip, and he doesn't notice. He laughs at his own confusion. He is easy to be near, which is rare across species lines. I did not know until this morning that he was doing all of this while having a wound in his arm. I am not sure what this tells me about humans. I think it tells me that they carry more than they show." Kevsal's account said, "I have studied the historical records of human conflict as part of my general military history coursework. The records consistently note that human forces were difficult to stop because they would sustain damage and continue operating. I attributed this to military culture, to training, to the specific conditions of conflict. I did not know it was simply them. The way they are made, I have updated my understanding." Kethwan's account was the most analytical and the most interesting to read. The human's wound biosignature was within normal human parameters upon campus entry. This means that his normal includes an open wound in the process of healing. We have been using standard galactic parameters to assess human physiological distress, which means we have been systematically misreading human condition. A human who is displaying normal by human standards may be managing situations that would register as distress states in every other enrolled species. I recommend that the campus medical monitoring system include a human-specific parameter set for biosignature interpretation. I have attached a preliminary framework. Ashtor's account. He negotiated with the peace officer. I have seen Drexian authority interactions many times. I have never seen anyone negotiate with a Drexian officer in a formal authority situation by simply giving accurate information calmly and waiting. I did not know that worked. I am going to think about this. Save 2's account. When the peace officer came in, I was afraid for the human. I was afraid that he was going to be in trouble for not reporting the injury. I have since realized that I was modeling his situation using Cerevian social parameters, where not reporting a health concern to the appropriate authority would be a serious social violation with significant consequences. By his own account, he simply did not think to report it because he did not experience it as reportable. I am trying to understand a species that does not classify what happened to him as reportable. I think I understand them slightly better now. I think I will require more data. Save 4's account. He said that pain is relative. This is not something our medical literature says. Our medical literature says that pain is specific and measurable and responds to specific interventions. He says he pushed it back and kept going. I want to ask him more about this, but I do not know how to ask without it seeming like I am questioning whether his experience is real. I believe his experience is real. I want to understand it. Veloman's account. I asked him if it scared him when it happened, and he said for a second, maybe 2. And then he decided he could handle it and the fear went away. I have been thinking about this since the class ended. In Thalleron psychology, fear is a state that happens to you. It doesn't go away because you decide it will. It resolves when the threat resolves. But he said he decided. The fear went away because he decided. I don't know what to do with this. I think it might be the most important thing I have heard this year. Sareth's account. I kept feeling his pain the whole class. It was there the whole class underneath everything else. A steady, dull, present thing. That's how it felt from the outside. And he just sat there with it. Participated in the class, asked questions about the reading. He sat there with pain in his arm and he asked good questions about silicon-based regeneration. I find this, I don't have the right word, I find this large. The concept is large. Both Keth students' accounts came in together, filed jointly, which is unusual. We spent the afternoon recalculating the campus biosignature parameters based on what we observed. Initial modeling suggests that a human student in a state of genuine distress, pain, illness, significant injury, might still scan as physiologically normal by current campus standards. This has security implications and medical monitoring implications, and general implications for how the integration program conceptualizes human well-being. We have submitted a recommendation to campus medical and to the integration program coordinators. We believe this is urgent. We also believe, and this is separate from the formal recommendation, that Marcus Acaffer is fine. The 2 Merle students submitted an account that was notable for being brief. We were afraid. Then we were not afraid. Then we were something we don't have a word for, which is a feeling about a thing being bigger than you expected it to be. We will try to find the word. We will report back.